Here are some of President Trump's most recent remarks. He described the situation as remarkable. Donald Trump believed he was untouchable by the law. 20 years ago, he transformed a real estate fortune into a personal legend so powerful that courtrooms, prosecutors, and federal investigators spent decades trying to break it and walked away with nothing. But right now, court just hit him with an instant verdict so fast, so decisive, and so completely unexpected that his own attorneys didn't see it coming until it had already landed. The ruling everyone predicted would take months, gone, signed, binding, effective immediately. What unfolded in between is the story nobody has had the nerve to tell straight, because this isn't about politics. This isn't about revenge, persecution, or any of the narratives you've heard 1,000 times. This is about a court that examined the record, looked at years of postponements, maneuvers, and legal tricks, and delivered 3 words that froze Trump's entire operation cold. Enough is enough. That was their verdict. And when you see what they order next, you'll understand why the people closest to Trump are using a word they've never used before: terrified. So what finally pushed the court over the edge? One moment, one decision, one move Trump's legal team made that they should have never made. They assumed the timeline was theirs to command, not occasionally, systematically. But here's the thing. This wasn't random. This was years of procedural maneuvering finally colliding with a judge who decided the game was finished. And I'm going to show you exactly how it all crumbled in a single instant. Most people think this story began with the ruling. It didn't. It began with a pattern, so bold, so consistent, so thoroughly recorded in the court documents, that the only real surprise is how long it took for someone with actual authority to finally act on it with the urgency it deserved. That's not a technicality. That's not a procedural side note. That's the entire foundation of what just happened. And when you grasp that foundation, the instant decision doesn't just make sense. It feels like it was always unavoidable. Let's go back to the beginning, because this story didn't start inside a courtroom. It started with a pattern, a decades-long pattern of behavior that finally, after all this time, ran out of road. Anyone who has followed Trump's legal battles knows the basic rhythm by now. A case gets filed. Lawyers submit motions. Judges schedule hearings. Hearings get delayed. Delays get extended. Appeals get filed before rulings even arrive. The entire machinery crawls forward at a pace so sluggish that by the time anything actually occurs, half the public has already shifted focus to the next controversy. That's not a coincidence. That's a calculated strategy. And it's a strategy that worked for Donald Trump with remarkable consistency across 4 decades of business disputes, regulatory battles, fraud accusations, and civil lawsuits. Keep things moving, keep things complicated, drain the opposition, outlast the short attention span of a distracted public. Until this week, when a judge decided the game was finished. Here's what you need to understand about the moment this ruling dropped. The legal proceedings had been moving through the system with all the usual friction, all the familiar back and forth, all the well-known patterns of delay and counter-delay that Trump's legal team had turned into something close to a fine art. Every motion was challenged. Every deadline was stretched. Every procedural opportunity was pushed to its absolute limit. Then, without any warning, the judge looked at everything on the table, looked at the mountain of filings, counter-filings, and legal arguments stacked on both sides, and made a decision that nobody in that courtroom would prepared for. Immediate effect, no delay, no transition window, no grace period for Trump's team to regroup. The ruling landed at a moment when Trump was doing exactly what he always does during legal proceedings, performing invincibility at campaign rallies, telling crowds the system is rigged, telling donors their money is fighting persecution, telling the media that every charge against him is politically motivated harassment from opponents terrified of what he represents. And while he was doing all of that, a judge signed a document that made his next 30 days look genuinely frightening. But here's what nobody is discussing yet. The speed of this ruling isn't just procedurally unusual, it's a signal. And when you understand what it signals, when you understand what it reveals about where this case is actually headed, the picture becomes far more alarming than the headline. Let me break down exactly what happened, because the details matter enormously here. The heart of this decision involves financial records that Trump's organization had been fighting to keep hidden from full judicial review. Documents that, according to sources familiar with the proceedings, tell a story about the internal financial structure of the Trump empire that is dramatically different from the story Trump has been presenting publicly for years. The judge had been patient. extraordinarily patient by the standards of those who observed these proceedings up close, and that patience, it just ran out. Motion after motion, delay after delay, argument after argument. Why certain records should stay protected, why certain communications fell under privilege, why certain financial arrangements had nothing to do with the matters at hand. And then something shifted. Something in the documents that finally came to the surface. Something in the testimony that had been quietly building beneath all the public drama. Something that pushed this particular judge past the point of patience and straight into the territory of immediate action. That's the part nobody has fully explained yet. And that's the part that should genuinely worry anyone paying close attention. Because when a judge abandons the usual procedural rhythm, when a judge decides that the normal pace of American justice isn't adequate for what they're witnessing, that tells you something profound about what they've seen. Judges don't speed things up without a reason. Judges don't skip the usual deliberation process because they're in a rush. They do it when they believe that waiting itself carries a risk. What risk? That's the question that's making Trump's inner circle genuinely anxious right now. Here's the financial picture as it stands today. And it's important to lay this out clearly, because the numbers matter enormously to understanding what's actually at stake. Trump's financial obligations from existing judgments, existing penalties, and existing legal rulings are already overwhelming. Hundreds of millions of dollars in civil judgments, legal fees draining campaign funds at a rate that would have destroyed a normal political operation years ago, properties running under court supervision, financial statements under monitoring, business structures that have been legally damaged by previous rulings. Now add this new instant decision on top of all of that. Add the immediate binding effect of a ruling that left zero transition time, no adjustment period, no opportunity for the kind of financial maneuvering that has historically been Trump's first line of defense whenever legal trouble closes in. The question financial analysts are asking behind closed doors right now is simple and brutal. Can I actually absorb this? Because here's something about the Trump financial empire that most people still don't fully grasp. The image and the reality have always been dramatically different. Gold letters on the buildings, the private jets, the exclusive memberships, the luxury branding, all of it projects an image of essentially unlimited wealth. But the underlying financial structure has always been far more fragile than the image suggests, heavily leveraged, deeply dependent on the brand value that the Trump name carries. Built on a foundation of financial relationships with banks and lenders who had their own reasons to maintain those connections, even when serious questions were being raised. That foundation has been cracking for years. Deutsche Bank finally walked away. Multiple major insurers refused to back his appeal bond. His own accounting firm sent a letter stating their previous work should no longer be trusted. The people who were once willing to extend financial protection to the Trump organization because of who he was have been quietly, systematically pulling that protection away. And now there's a new ruling. Immediate. Binding. No warning. Watch the people around Trump right now. Not the ones appearing on camera. Not the lawyers delivering press statements outside courthouses. Watch the people you don't see. The financial advisors, the property managers, the executives running the day-to-day operations of his business empire. Those people are not sleeping well. There's a particular kind of panic that sets in when a legal situation moves faster than your legal team anticipated. When the timeline you built your entire strategy around suddenly collapses. When the breathing room you were counting on vanishes without notice. That's exactly where the Trump organization finds itself right now. And the decisions being made in the next 72 hours are going to determine a great deal about what comes next. But here's where the story gets genuinely complicated. And I want to be honest with you about that. Because if I'm not, I'm doing the exact same thing every other commentator does. Giving you the version of events that simply confirms what you already believe. Trump's supporters have a counterargument here, and it deserves to be taken seriously. Because some of the most seasoned legal observers in the country are raising questions about procedural fairness that go well beyond partisan loyalty. The speed of this ruling is itself the problem. Some of them are arguing. American justice is built on deliberation. It's built on the principle that even people who appear guilty deserve the full weight of procedural protection. When a judge moves this quickly, when the normal checks and balances of the appeals process are compressed to this degree, you create a situation where the appearance of justice and the reality of justice can drift apart. So which is it? Is this legitimate legal accountability finally catching up to someone who has dodged consequences for half a century? Or is this the legal system being used as a weapon against a specific political figure in a way that will set dangerous precedents for everyone who comes after? Both questions deserve honest answers, and here's the uncomfortable truth that makes this situation genuinely difficult. The evidence of financial misconduct in the court record is overwhelming. The documentation is extensive. The pattern is undeniable to anyone who has examined the actual filings with even a basic level of objectivity. And at the same time, the speed and manner of this particular ruling is unusual enough that it raises legitimate procedural questions that cannot simply be brushed aside just because you happen to dislike the person it targets. We don't get to have a legal system that operates fairly only for people we approve of. That's not how it works. That's not how it can work if the system itself is going to survive as an institution that commands public trust. Here's the rewritten YouTube script continuation. So hold both of those thoughts at the same time. This appears to be genuine accountability for genuine wrongdoing, and the way it was delivered creates real questions about institutional process that matter regardless of who the target is. Now let's talk about what happens next, because this immediate ruling is only the beginning of what's about to unfold. Trump's legal team has filed emergency motions, multiple simultaneous emergency motions, attacking the ruling from every possible angle. Constitutional challenges to the court's authority to act with this level of speed. Procedural challenges to the process by which the ruling was reached. Substantive challenges to the core findings that led to the decision in the first place. This is what maximum legal firepower looks like when it's deployed in genuine panic mode. Because that's exactly what this is. Panic. Controlled, expensive, professionally executed panic. But panic nonetheless. The courts receiving those emergency motions will move quickly. That's the nature of emergency filings. And the decisions that come back in the next 2 weeks will either give Trump the breathing room he desperately needs, or confirm that the walls are closing faster than anyone anticipated. Here's what legal insiders are watching for. Specifically, they're watching whether any appeals court judge grants a stay. A temporary pause on the ruling while the appeals process plays out. A stay would be significant. It would suggest that at least some appeals judges believe the underlying ruling has enough procedural weakness to justify hitting pause. No stay, on the other hand, would be devastating. It would mean the appeals courts looked at the emergency motions and decided the ruling was solid enough that immediate enforcement was appropriate. That would accelerate everything. Every Trump property in the affected area would instantly fall under the ruling's requirements. Every financial decision the organization needs to make would require court-appointed approval. Every deal, every transaction, every operational choice would suddenly need judicial sign-off. For an organization that has always operated at the speed of a single dominant personality making unilateral decisions, that kind of institutional paralysis is potentially fatal. And then there's the political dimension, which cannot be separated from the legal dimension, no matter how much anyone on either side would prefer to pretend they're completely unrelated. Trump is running for president again. Depending on when you're watching this, he's either a leading candidate, the sitting president, or somewhere in the extraordinary position of being legally besieged while simultaneously seeking or holding the most powerful office in the world. That situation is genuinely without precedent in American history. Nobody has a roadmap. Nobody has seen this before. Nobody can tell you with confidence how it ends. What we do know is that Trump's political strategy has always been to convert legal troubles into political fuel. Every indictment becomes a fundraising email. Every ruling becomes evidence of persecution. Every financial penalty becomes proof that the system is targeting him specifically because of what he represents to his supporters. And that strategy has worked. It has worked extraordinarily well. The numbers are crystal clear. Legal trouble directly connects to surges in small-dollar donations. His base responds to perceived persecution with a loyalty that has only grown stronger over time. But here's the question nobody wants to ask out loud. Is there a limit to that strategy? Is there a point where the legal situation becomes so urgent, so immediate, so impossible to spin into a narrative advantage that even the most devoted supporters have to face the reality of what's actually happening? We might be approaching that point. Not because of the politics, not because of public perception, but because of the math. You cannot politically fundraise your way out of a court-ordered asset seizure. At a certain point, the numbers become physical. Properties either get sold or they don't. Financial judgments either get paid or they don't. Business operations either continue or they get shut down by court order. Narrative is powerful. Narrative has carried Trump further than almost any analyst thought possible. But narrative eventually collides with the immovable reality of legal enforcement mechanisms that don't care about poll numbers, rally crowd sizes, or the loyalty of a political base. That reality is what's sitting on Donald Trump's desk right now. Let me tell you something. The official coverage of this story is completely missing. Something that gets buried under all the legal jargon, the procedural details, and the endless back and forth of competing claims. There are real people attached to this story. Not Trump, not Letitia James, not the judges ruling on emergency motions. Real people whose financial futures are directly tied to what happens in these proceedings. The workers inside Trump properties who don't know if their jobs will exist in 6 months. The vendors and contractors sitting on unpaid invoices with no clear sense of whether they'll ever be settled. The small business owners whose livelihoods depend on commercial relationships with the Trump organization. The people who purchase condominiums in Trump buildings, now watching the value of those units swing with every new legal development. These are the people the coverage forgets. These are the people living inside the consequences of this ruling, in ways that have absolutely nothing to do with the political drama playing out on the national stage. And here's what's genuinely troubling about their situation. They have no control. They're caught between an organization defending itself with maximum legal aggression and a regulatory system enforcing its judgments with maximum institutional authority. And neither of those forces has any particular reason to make their situation a priority. That's always how it works. When a major financial and legal collapse begins to unfold, the people with resources protect themselves. The people without resources absorb the impact. Now, let me take you inside the actual mechanics of what happens if enforcement moves forward without a stay, because this is where the abstract legal drama becomes very concrete, very fast. Court-appointed receivers have the authority to take physical control of properties. They can walk through the door with court orders, escort management out, and begin the process of evaluating, managing, and eventually liquidating assets to satisfy judgments. Each individual case has its own logic, its own timeline, its own path forward. But when you zoom out, when you look at the full picture of legal exposure that Donald Trump is currently navigating, what emerges is the image of a man running out of roads simultaneously in multiple directions at once. The legal strategy has always relied on one core assumption, that no single case would ever move fast enough, be decisive enough, or carry sufficient enforcement power to genuinely threaten the core of the empire. Divide the opposition, delay each individual battle long enough, make sure nothing ever lands a decisive blow. An instant ruling destroys that calculation completely. An instant ruling says the assumption of controlling the timeline was always an illusion, that a judge can decide at any moment to strip away that timing advantage and force the crisis into the present tense. That's why this ruling feels different to the people watching closely. That's why the legal insiders who have been tracking these cases for years are saying the words they're saying right now. Everything is accelerated. And once things accelerate in a legal situation this complex, with this many moving parts, this many competing pressures all bearing down simultaneously, the outcomes become genuinely unpredictable in ways they simply weren't before. Let me tell you what's keeping the people around Trump up at night. It's not this ruling in isolation, it's the question of what comes next. Because here's the pattern that has been quietly building for 2 years. Every time the legal situation seems to reach a plateau, every time it feels like the worst has been absorbed and the organization can stabilize, something new drops. A ruling, a decision, a filing, a disclosure. Something that resets the pressure level and makes the previous plateau feel like nothing more than the calm before the storm. Is this the same thing? Is this just another moment that will feel 6 months from now like a temporary escalation before the next plateau? Or is this genuinely different? Is this the moment where the accumulated weight of years of legal pressure finally reaches the point where the structure beneath it begins to give way? The honest answer is, nobody knows. Not the lawyers, not the analysts, not the people inside the Trump organization itself. The legal system is generating too many simultaneous pressure points for anyone to predict the outcome with any real confidence. But here's what I can tell you. The instant ruling is not the end of this story. It's not even close to the end of the story. What it is a turning point. A moment where the rules of the game changed in ways that cannot be reversed. The breathing room that Trump's legal strategy depended on has been compressed. The timing advantage that every delay, every motion, every procedural maneuver was designed to preserve has been dismantled by a judge who decided the normal rules no longer applied to what was sitting in front of them. And when a judge makes that decision, when a judge looks at the record and concludes that the usual pace of justice is simply inadequate to the situation, What they're really saying should make everyone sit up straight. They're saying the situation is serious enough to demand urgency. They're saying the normal safeguards against immediate consequences are insufficient protection given what the record contains. They're saying that waiting carries risks, and that immediate action is necessary to prevent those risks. That's a statement about the underlying substance of what they've seen, and it's a statement that no amount of political framing, no press conferences outside courthouses, no rally speeches about persecution and witch hunts can actually answer, because the judge isn't watching the rallies. The appeals judges reviewing the emergency motions aren't reading the fundraising emails. The receivers preparing to potentially enforce the judgment aren't paying attention to the poll numbers. The legal system, when it finally moves on its own logic. And right now, that logic is moving fast. Here's the actual state of play. As of right now, emergency motions are pending. Appeals judges are reviewing. Receivers are standing by. Financial monitors are watching every transaction the Trump organization attempts to execute. Letitia James's enforcement team is prepared to move the moment a stay is denied. And Trump is campaigning. Trump is fundraising. Trump is telling his supporters, this is the greatest witch hunt in the history of American politics. Trump is doing what Trump always does, performing invincibility for the cameras while his lawyers fight desperate battles behind closed doors. The appeals court timeline is tight. The decisions that come back on those emergency motions will either stabilize the situation temporarily or trigger the most consequential sequence of financial enforcement actions against a former American president in history. There is no third option anymore. That's what this instant ruling took away. The space between the crisis and the resolution has been dramatically compressed. The comfortable middle ground where legal battles could stretch on indefinitely has been collapsed into something far more immediate. I've been watching legal stories like this for a long time, and I want to tell you something about the moments when everything changes. When cases that seemed like they might drag on forever suddenly accelerate into something decisive. They rarely announce themselves in advance. The moments that change everything rarely look dramatic from the outside until after they've already happened. What looks like just another ruling, just another decision in a long sequence of decisions, turns out to be the pivot point that everything else rotates around. I think this is one of those moments. I think this instant ruling is the kind of decision that people will look back on as the moment the trajectory shifted, the moment the rules changed in a way that couldn't be undone. But I've been wrong before, and the honest thing to say is that American legal history is full of stories that seemed certain and then didn't deliver, seemed inevitable, and then found another way, seemed like the walls were closing and then the walls stopped. Maybe that happens here. Maybe the appeals courts grant a stay. Maybe the emergency motions find an angle that creates breathing room. Maybe the legal creativity that has historically shielded Trump finds a new form that nobody has anticipated yet. Maybe. But the energy in this moment, the speed of this ruling, the readiness of the enforcement teams, the financial math now operating under a compressed timeline, all of it points in the direction that is very difficult to spin away from. Something is ending. What exactly is ending and when it ends and what it looks like when it does, those questions are still open. But the sense that the game is the same game it has always been, that the rules haven't fundamentally shifted, that the strategies that worked before will simply work again, that sense is gone now. It left the moment the gavel came down without warning, and it is not coming back. The next ruling is coming faster than anyone expected. The decisions made in the next 72 hours will determine whether immediate enforcement begins or gets paused while the appeals process plays out. And whatever happens in those 72 hours, nothing goes back to the way it was. Because that's what an instant court decision means. When it lands on someone who has spent 50 years betting that decisions like this were always avoidable, it means the bet has finally been called. And everyone who has been watching is about to find out what he's actually holding. The clock is running. And this time, there is no one left to slow it down.